Welcome everyone to Startup Law for Founders. This video series is going to explore the ways that you can establish clear and effective relationships that are going to fuel the success of your new enterprise. In this first video, Francesco and I are going to talk a little bit about incorporation and legal structure, what to do when you have an idea and you want to see what can happen with it. Francesco, thanks for having this conversation today. I'm very excited about this and excited to give entrepreneurs some things to think about at the outset of this adventure.
Yeah, likewise. I think I think that the legal component of entrepreneurship is kind of a black box, I think, to a lot of at least first-time entrepreneurs. And what I'm looking forward to doing is sharing how legal technology, including like the corporation, is actually was designed as a tool for entrepreneurs. It is a toolbox that enables entrepreneurs to build successful companies. And so the purpose of this series is to explain exactly what those tools are and how to deploy them effectively as an entrepreneur.
Totally. It's and there are a couple of critical things that I think are super valuable at the outset to explore. The first being when a company should incorporate, and then the kind of the how, the mechanics, some of the considerations to think about. But if you're an entrepreneur, maybe you are writing some code base at night, maybe you have a product idea, or or doing something, doing a service that you want to take on your own and scale. When is the right time to start thinking about the legal considerations?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it's obviously an important question, and there's a couple of different ways to answer it. One way to answer it is by kind of backing into the answer by understanding what a corporation or an LLC is there for. What is the function of it, and from understanding the function, it will make a lot more sense when it will, when you want to use that function as an entrepreneur. So corporations came into being as a way for entrepreneurs to pool capital and resources and talent together in order to engage in a risky enterprise, a risky venture. And what's valuable about it is you create this new legal person, the entity, and you can bring together partners and share the equity of the venture. You can employ people, hire consultants and advisors, and give them equity in the venture. You can raise money from investors and give them equity in the venture. You can enter into contracts in the name of this new entity and everyone can be involved in it without risking anything of their own personal wealth. Your only risk is what you choose to put into the company. And on top of that, the corporate law and the corporate statutes, they create a governance framework so that once you have this pooled capital together, all these pooled resources, there's a mechanism of decision making and oversight that ensures that the company is being run properly and with some accountability. All of which adds a lot of value because it gives people increased confidence that their capital, that they're going to be protected by the law. So kind of like stepping back from there, you could see like that when as an entrepreneur, you're sort of ready to commit to something and you're ready to bring people together in order to build value and equity, and you want to maybe bring co-founders on board, you want to incentivize advisors and consultants and pull together a team and think about raising investment capital, and building equity in that way. That as soon as it becomes clear you want to do that, the incorporation makes a lot of sense. Because once you have an entity, you can deploy the tools of corporate law to bring people together and create an enterprise, create value. So, I mean, it's kind of
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of different stakeholders. It could be a co-founder, it could be investors, it could be advisors, people that you are bringing into this entity. Do you need to have those people in mind to make this initial decision?
No, not at all. I mean, I think that really you want to be, I guess in the startup journey, there tends to be a phase where as one or more founders, you're kind of incubating an idea and deciding, am I going to pull the trigger on this and give it a legitimate go? And it's really that inflection point where you're ready to give it a go that I think is the point where it makes sense to seriously consider incorporation, because at least for not every company is the kind of growth company that's going to require a big team, but a lot of the companies that we work with are startups that are small at the onset, but intended to get big as they achieve product market fit, raise investment capital and so forth. So, so if you're that kind of startup, you may not know who your investors are going to be, who your advisors are going to be, even who your co-founders are going to be. But having the company in place will, enables you to bring those people together and create clear contractual relationships and issue equity and incentivize people in a way that can really propel and build momentum and value.
So this inflection point is really this decision to say, yes, I'm committed to making this happen. And from that commitment point, it sounds like thinking about the legal pieces of this are really going to help a founder find clarity around how to implement the vision.
Well, it provides an essential toolkit for implementation. I mean, implementation is really, that's kind of more on the business and operational side. And legal is sort of the toolkit that you use to create a kind of foundation and a structure around implementation. So another way to think of it is, again, like this, building a company, it's a team initiative. There are a lot of stakeholders. You need, you need the contributors, investors, and vendors and suppliers, and all those people need to be brought together in pursuit of this shared vision. And the function of corporate law and all of the legal frameworks around that are to enable those relationships to happen through contracts, through the corporate law, employment laws. The legal regimes create a kind of background set of understandings that enable the creation of clear relationships, and that clarity works to everyone's benefit. Everybody knows kind of like what their obligations are, what they're getting in exchange, what the deal is, so to speak, and done right, you create an alignment of incentives that get people rowing in the same direction, and that can be extremely powerful. So the corporation is really one of the most successful legal innovations over the past 200 years. It's just the kind of results speak for themselves in terms of the, explosion of business activity and over the past couple of centuries.
You use the word innovation and technology in talking about these legal structures, which may seem like a foreign thing for a lot of people who think of technology as the phone in their pocket, or these electronics that are facilitating connection and speed, efficiency in our world, driving down the cost of doing business, etc. But I think it's interesting that you are framing the legal tools as a technology as something that is going to enable you to do this thing better.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we live in a world that's shaped by laws, but it's kind of invisible to us, So corporations and limited liability protection and the idea that we can create our own companies and issue stock in them, that wasn't always part of the legal background. Prior to, and I think it was like in roughly the 17th or 18th century. I'm not a historian, but it was, really at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution that this technology took hold and came to the United States shortly after its founding. I think the first limited liability statute was in New York around the year 1800. We're getting into some historical weeds here, but yeah, it wasn't always the case that you could do that. And once it was introduced in New York, it kind of spread like wildfire in the United States and fueled and enabled this remarkable flowering of the entrepreneurial spirit. And America prospered, I think, in large part because of what, the responsibility doesn't lie with corporations, but corporations provide an organizational and legal infrastructure. You could use the word technology that is incredibly helpful to entrepreneurship. And we see with our clients every day, like the ones that the successful entrepreneurs use these tools. They're incentivizing people with equity, creating partnerships with their among co-founders, building boards of directors that provide value and really effective oversight that results in better decision making. There is a lot of benefit that comes from incorporation and using the tools around incorporation. There's obviously some trade-offs and dark sides to capitalism and the corporate form. We've talked about that with some other people in our community. But for purposes of this conversation, we work with entrepreneurs who have visions and creative ideas, and they're often big visions. And we're bringing people together to bring forward, new ways of doing things. And corporations and LLCs are a fantastic tool created for that purpose.
So if I'm an entrepreneur, I have this tool set with me. I've made this commitment that, yes, I want to start a company. I want to use this technology to bring my vision, my mission to life. That kind of shifts us into this next question, which is, how do I use this tool set? At a broad level, how do you do this right?
Well, corporate formation, getting the corporate formation right is there's some core components to it. I would break it down into 4 or 5 key things that need to happen to have what I would consider a well done corporate formation. One is choosing the right entity, whether it's corporation, an LLC, a limited partnership. Those are really the 3 big general buckets that we work in. Within corporation, there are tax elections, C and S Corp. There are benefit corporations, professional corporations. So there's some nuances, but those are the big general buckets that we're working with. So choosing the right one based on your goals, based on where you're headed in the near and longer term future, based on the tax posture of the company, is a key element of getting it right. And that's for high growth technology companies that are going down the VC and institutional funding path, that tends to be the C Corporation, the Delaware C Corporation. But there are other, lots of other, models of building companies. So that may be the right answer for some companies, but it, in my experience, it's really tends to be, with the exception of that sort of tech and high growth model. In other areas, it tends to be case by case, like a kind of considered evaluation of the vision, tax considerations, and the funding model, and so forth, where you choose the entity that makes the most sense in the formation process. Part of that too is, do you do Delaware or California? We're based in California, or it's generally the choice is Delaware and the state that you're located in physically. And that consideration is, I think primarily based on whether you're building a company that has, where the stakeholders are likely to be, multi-state or national. And because Delaware's emerged as essentially like a national kind of corporate law language that the business community is speaking for the most part. So, corporate law, contract law in the United States, it's those are state created bodies of law, and having to navigate 50 sets of rules can be really complex. So Delaware has, over the years positioned itself as a friendly state to do, to incorporate in for a variety of, very good reasons. They've just invested in creating the most advanced corporate law regime, court systems that are very efficient at resolving business disputes, a Secretary of State's office that's very, very responsive and gets things done quickly, turns things around quickly, and so forth. This has been a deliberate effort, and it's been successful. So as a result of that, most professional investors are most comfortable investing in Delaware entities. So, but there are plenty of businesses where the need for that is not apparent. And companies that are smaller in scope and aren't likely necessarily to have a national scope to what they're doing, or institutional investors, forming in California might make just perfect sense. So entity choice is number one, including, the where question. Number two is setting up establishing clear relationships among the initial founders. So making some decisions about equity splits, about how the company is going to be governed and managed, who's going to sit on the board of directors, who the officer is going to be running the day-to-day, and what are their roles going to be, How are we going to divide the initial equity? How's that equity going to vest? The core relationships among the founding team, getting clarity around that, and then reflecting it in documentation is a really helpful thing to occur, so that everybody's on the same page. They understand how things are going to be done, the expectations, and so then people can stop thinking about that and start focusing on growing the business. That's really valuable. The third bucket is getting all the intellectual property that you need to run the business into the new venture at the time of formation. That means generally like assigning all the know-how and intellectual property into the company. Or if that's not what's going to happen, getting a license to the intellectual property into the company. But basically, intellectual property, and by that we mean not just like patents and obvious intellectual property like that, but the business ideas, the know-how, the way of doing things, all of that is, if not now, at some point may become protectable trade secrets. And even just ideas might have some legal standing, protectable legal standing under the law. So you want to have everything, all IP related to the business vested in the company, and contractual protections around the IP. So IP is another sort of bucket. And then finally, you want to issue the stock in a formal way to create. There's a lot of reasons for that, but establishing the issuance for tax purposes, for capital gains purposes, and having clarity around that, a documented clarity around that is really important, particularly later on down the road as you're looking at a potential exit. So having clarity around the stock issuances, making appropriate tax elections relating to those stock issuances is critically important. And then maybe the final element is to create an incentive compensation pool. This obviously is not appropriate for every type of company. A lot of companies, it's not contemplated that they're going to be issuing stock options and other forms of equity to team members. But in many companies, especially growth companies, that is contemplated. So having a pool established and in place so that founders can bring on team members and issue equity very efficiently and effectively, and in compliance with securities laws, is often a fundamental step of the corporate formation process.
And in a lot of this, I'm hearing this theme of clarity around the creations, the intellectual property, the way that you're going to be doing the business, clarity around the relationships as you incentivize people to come into this new entity, and especially clarity around the relationship you have with any co-founder or co-founders that may be joining as a partner. And these are all things that we're going to explore a little bit more in depth in this series. And up next in this series is going to be specifically this co-founder relationship, which a lot of times can be the thing to make or break a company.
Yeah, absolutely. It is obviously a hugely important relationship. It's intense. You're going through a lot of ups and downs together, and spending day in and day out together. And because of that, the ups and downs can be internal as well as external. Emotional and all of the elements of being a human come into play and really make a difference.
Yeah, it's we're talking about the legal technology and these entities that are not human, but they are very human because it's people that are operating inside of this.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, and when you and I, we've talked a lot about this, but the co-founder relationship is over many years of working with companies. I've brought a lot of companies together, and then I've also worked in, I think, too many cases where partners are breaking up, so to speak, and those are tough situations. And on the legal side, having a proper corporate formation done really creates it. It makes can make that process a lot easier, because you've thought about that eventuality in advance, and so what's going to happen in terms of the breaking up of the business is already spelled out in contracts, and so so the parameters are clearer, and that clarity can make an enormous difference in how painful the breakup is. So that is, I think, a really key benefit of corporate formation, and not just with respect to co-founders, but we're talking about clarity. People come and go. I mean, people's lives change, their circumstances change, their priorities change. So they may be committed on day one, but 6 months later, they may have a kid, or they may need to move for whatever reason. I mean, things happen, and part of, as a founder, protecting your business is taking that into account. And that is really one of the key benefits of having clarity in relationships. We spell out in advance what happens in those situations, so that when it does happen, because it will, it doesn't disrupt. It's not a disruption. It's, you don't have somebody walking away with a whole bunch of stock that they haven't earned. You don't have somebody claiming that they're entitled to something that they're not, because it's written down in a contract. So
I'm excited to dive more into that one, especially. I think there's a lot to glean from the next video in the series about the dynamics among co-founders specifically.
Oh yeah, I think it's. I'm excited to talk about that too, because we have a lot to say about it. Yeah, I think it'll be good. Because I think over the years I've gained some perspective on when the co-founder relationship is not going well, the business generally suffers, because a lot of energy is being depleted by difficulties in the relationship. So we've developed this co-founder dynamics course, which we'll talk about in the next video, that's really designed to kind of normalize some of the challenges and create some perspective around the challenges that co-founders face. Because what I've found is that when people understand how normal it is to have the ups and downs, and what those look like and feel like, it enables them to navigate those waters so much more effectively. So I'm looking forward to the next video, sharing more about the class.
Awesome. I think that's a good teaser and a good break point for now. Thank you, Francesco, for joining this conversation. It's been a lot of fun.
It has. Thanks, Chris.